Rabbi Moshe Sherer had only one accountability, and his accountability was to the Rebbeinu Shalom. He was an Eved Hashem.
What defines a leader?
A leader to me is someone who understands when something has to be done, does it.
Someone who is bold enough to make decisions.
Principled, purposeful, and passionate.
A person who was able to inspire.
A great role model, a great leader.
Who would give himself up to the people and not think of anybody else.
Ultimately, the test of leadership is, have you achieved anything for the group that you're a leader of?
Chazal tell us what defines a leader. When Moshe Rabbeinu wanted somebody to take over for himself, he told the Rebbeinu Shalom, someone that can understand each person, that can speak, can understand everybody. Rabbi Moshe was able to have a sprach with every single type of person. A Chassidish Yid, a Litvish Yid. It made no difference who you were. You know, I always say that growing up, my father was colorblind. He didn't make a difference in who you were. You were a Yid, it made no difference. I love you because you're a Yid. I think Rabbi Moshe felt the same way.
As I look around here tonight, and I would like all of us to look with the same eyes. I do not see Jews from New York or from Chicago or from Los Angeles or Cleveland or Boston or Toronto. I do not see whether Chassidish Yid, non-Chassidish Yid, or whatever the upstam, whatever land of origin. I see only Jews. Teire, herzige Yid.
If you ask me what was his greatest Mesiras Nefesh, his greatest Mesiras Nefesh was that he was one of the star Talmidim by Rav Runeman, and they pulled him out of the Kaisle Beis Medrash to do Klal Yisroel's Avodah.
We do not live for ourselves. We must live for others. We do not live for ourselves.
This is godless. I would call it even more than godless. I would call it malchus.
He was malchustic. He carried himself with a tremendous dignity.
And he was tremendous warm. He was tremendous warm to us. And tremendous mechazik, always mechazik.
There was a Yid in Eretz Yisroel who was a yeshiva, not alive anymore, told me that he was a Talmud of Reuben Gruzovsky. And he was here in America at the time. And there was a question about the Benos, a good Yisroel, doing something. And my father was adamant that they shouldn't do what they wanted to do. And Mrs. Belsky, Rabbi Shaul Belsky's mother, was running the Benos at the time. And my father said, we'll go together to Reb Reuven and we'll ask Reb Reuven Gruzovsky what the right thing to do is. Reb Reuven paskined not like my father. And my father turned around and accepted it. And Reb Reuven told this Rosh Yeshiva who was sitting next to Reb Reuven, he said, the Yid, talking about my father, he's going to go now and work for that tzad as if it was his tzad, because he has no tzad. His tzad is to listen to whatever Gedolim Yisroel told him. And I believe that that's something that he gave over Yerusha to Rabbi Moshe Sherer, and it's something that Rabbi Moshe Sherer lived with his whole life.
He says he would tell me, Shlomo, I'm a pretty smart guy. I would come up with an agenda, and I would work on this presentation to the Meyetzes Gedolei Torah for hours. For hours I would work on it. I convinced myself, I was so sure, when I walk into the room, they're all going to stand up, they're going to applaud, they're going to say, Rabbi Moshe, what a great idea, we're going to do it.
And they said no. And he walked around the rest of that day smiling. And they asked him, Rabbi Moshe, why are you so happy today? He said, because today I have a chance once again to be Mekayim, the words of the Gedolei Yisroel.
And that was his pride and joy. It was his happiest times that no matter how smart he thought he was, but his spotless, his one total is spotless.
It started when I was young, when Rav Aaron was the Gadol Ador. And then Rabbi Moshe Rabbi Yaakov. And then to a next generation, Reb Shneir, Reb Baruch Sorotzkin, Reb El Yisvei Zechoinu Levracha, Rav Pam Zechoinu Levracha.
As he got older and the Gedolim were getting younger, that he was able to machni himself to the Gedolim who were close to his age or maybe younger than him.
Even in front of Gedolim that were not a good Gedolim.
It's a chiddush, a person that is an askin, that's a maslich like askin, and that he can always look at, Gedolei Yisroel, mechatesa, they understand, and he knows better. And he didn't have that. He didn't have that at all.
Well, before I begin anything at all, I would just like to tell you that I'm sitting here with great trepidation and fear, if that's the right words I'm using, to tell you anything about Rabbi Moshe Sherer, Zachron Tzadik Levracha, because I don't think the world really knows who he is or who he was. On him we could say what the Gemara says, he's a ish ashkoilis. He had everything in him.
He was a one-man Vadatzola. He was a one-man hospital. He was a one-man Beis Medrash. He was a one-man office. He was a one-man of Derech Eretz. He was the one-man of integrity. He was the one-man of every good thing in Klal Yisrael.
Kol ha-neshama tahalel hallelujah. His whole life, not neshama, was neshima. Every breath that this man took was for one purpose, for Klal Yisroel. When he was a young man, he could have had a prestigious position as a Rav, and he would have had an easy life, much easier than he had now. And he said to his great Rebbe, Rav Aaron Kotler, who gave him all the courage to continue his work, that I'll go and I'll be a Rav of a Kehillah of 400 people. I'll be Marbitz Torah. What could be better than that? And Rabbi Aaron looked him straight in the eye and said, no, Rabbi Moshe, you're going to be for Klal Yisrael. You'll be Marbitz Torah and being a schus for hundreds of thousands of Yidden. And you must take this position of Agudas Yisrael. And this was the man that he clung to his entire life. Whatever Rabbi Aaron said, that was it.
Rabbi Aaron was the head of Moetzet Gedolei Torah. So when you talk about Rabbi Aaron being head of Moetzet Gedolei Torah, you have to understand it. What it meant was Rabbi Aaron ran everything. And Rav Sherer was a way of Rav Aaron implementing his Das Torah. And Rav Sherer was a soldier.
I heard myself from Moshe Sherer that he says he thinks for 11 years he spoke to Rabbi Aaron the Zayda, Zachar Tzadik Levracha, every day.
He branded what we call today Agudas Yisroel of America. Agudas Yisroel of America, wherever they go, are respected.
Rabbi Sherer was a very important part of the increasing importance of the Orthodox Jewish community in America. Rabbi Sherer was very well viewed in the halls of government. He was charming, he was smart. Rabbi Sherer really was an extraordinary organizer, administrator, leader, and built up the organization to the point of great strength it enjoyed when he was nifter, and since then, of course.
Rabbi Sherer had a remarkable way with political leaders, with elected officials. And it's a surprising thing in a certain way, because politicians are politicians.
It's a very interesting shaila. And probably because his Matorah was Torah. His connection with the politicians, with the Goyish Welt was only Letelis, and it was for what the Gedolim wanted from him. So
Rabbi Sherer was a master at relationships with everybody.
He didn't shy away from meeting people who were very distant from him philosophically and far from Aguda ideologically. And just to watch Rabbi Sherer, who was a clean-shaven person, to interact with some of the biggest rebbes in America and in Eretz Yisrael, it showed the level of respect that they had for him.
We say, Lo kambi Yisrael kamo sha'od. He was a unique individual, a man of his time and ahead of his time. He had vision. He cared about his friends, and his friends cared about him. He understood the importance of a balabas, which I think he learned from Rav Aaron Kotler Zecher Tzadik Levracha, and he cared about the Sheres HaPleita. His closest friends were survivors because he felt it. He lived through that period. He understood coming to America the way they came, that they needed a home. And the home wasn't just an organization. The home was a friend.
One of the great influences of my father's life in his formative years had to have been Rabbi Chanan Wasserman. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman was here in America in 1938, and he had asked Rabbi Shagafai Mendelovich to send him every day a different bacha to stay with him in the Broadway Central Hotel. At one point, Rav Shaga Feivel, instead of sending a smicha age boy of 23, 22, 23, Rav Shaga Feivel asked the Lochanan if he could send him a 17-year-old boy. And this 17-year-old boy, young Moshe Sherer, would not just be with him just for one day, but he asked that he stay with him for a period of time for 2.5 to 3 months. When my father came that very first day to Rabbi Chanan in the Broadway Central Hotel, he said to my father, I've been every day having an older bacha, 22, 23, now all of a sudden a 17-year-old boy, and not only that, it's not only going to be for one day, it's going to be for an extended period of time. So he said, so we're going to have to learn every day together. Every day we'll learn together in the morning, and then we'll do whatever we have to do. Interestingly enough, my father sits down to learn with him the first day, and they're learning Gemara together, and Rabbi Chanan asked him a kasha on the Gemara they're learning. So my father right away, Rabbi Chanan asked him a kasha, and he said to Rabbi Chanan, Ich weiß nicht, I don't know the answer. I don't know. So Rabbi Chanan Vassman looked at him, and my father told me it was a tremendous lesson that he learned. You have a kasha on the Gemara, and the kasha is bothering you, and you can't eat, and you can't drink, and you can't sleep. After 3 days, this is how he said, nicht essen, nicht trinken, und nicht schlafen. After 3 days, the cup tut sich azoi weh, your head is bothering you so. Now, you first have the right to say, ich weiß nicht, I don't know. But the lessons that he learned, just an example, this one lesson, azoi schnell sagen, ich weiß nicht. You can't say, I don't know that quickly. Many are good at projects that many would say to him, where are you going to get the funding for it? And normally he would answer, I don't know. But you can't say, I don't know. That's what Rabbi Chanan Vassman taught him.
He told me this himself, that he learned lessons in achrayus, lessons in helping people from Rabbi Chanan Vassman.
Inspiring every Jew to understand the achrayus we have today. The achrayus to children, the achrayus to adults, and the opportunities. We can do so much for Zikri Arabim today in 1 week that was not possible to do 50 years ago in 5 years.
Rabbi Sherer understood that the purpose of the Aguda was to get as much of the community that we can develop into one group to work on those things that individual groups cannot do. In the 1960s, it was a matter of the independent orthodoxy, is to go be able to speak to the government. In the 1970s, they saw that the need was social services and started Project Cope and Senior Citizen Centers. And in the 80s, first the Jews in Iran, and then Russia.
Everything that Rabbi Sherer did for the Klal had to be ois gehalten.
And the Kotzker Rebbe says that there are 3 levels of truth. One level is a person who will not say a lie. A second level is a person who tells the truth. But the third and most important level is the person who fights for the truth. And those are the Sarei Alofim. And this is the purpose of Agudas Yisroel, to fight for the truth. Because we know that behind this truth is the nitzchias of Klal Yisroel.
He was an ish emes when that wonderful paper that shouldn't be found in a Jew's house, the New York Times, sent out reporters to find dirt on him because he had a lot of money from the government that went through his hands. And they said, go out and find some dirt on him. How upset was he when he heard that? And those reporters went around digging and digging, and then they came back and reported to their wonderful leaders of the New York Times, we couldn't find a speck of dirt on this man.
He was one of the unique individuals who could walk into a mayor's office, a governor's office, a senator's office, a congressman's office, and they respected him for what he stood for. There was no contradiction in his personal life, in his public life, and his commitment. And he gave kavod to Torah in a unique way.
A larger-than-life figure. Every time people ask me that, I don't know how to answer it. Larger-than-life figure, to me, he was daddy. To my children, all his einiklach, he was Zaidi, who went out of his way to tell them his fictitious characters that he made up, Pinchikol and Chana Fufala, and the stories about them flying on a magical chocolate matzah.
My Zaidi was a phenomenal storyteller.
It was a thrill every year at the Aguda convention when I was a little boy. First, I'd sit amongst the crowds, listening to the speeches of the Gedolim, and then afterwards, during the Zmiris and the dancing, and this just shows what he was all about, he'd fish me out from the crowd. He'd pull me into the dancing and dance with me in front of everyone. I felt like $1 million.
A very big part of the home was, my father believed that Amunah Shlema, a Yid can't go to sleep at night, no matter how busy your day is, without learning. I recall as a young boy, he would not, if he wasn't that tired, it would be a Gemara before he went to sleep. If he was very tired, my father had this tremendous affinity for Medrash Rabbah.
He coined the phrase Rebbe Yisroel and Klal Yisroel, because that's how he lived his life, like two sides of a coin.
Even before I started working for the Aguda, back in the 1970s, I was still a kid. Rabbi Sherer called me and asked me to undertake researching and writing some grant proposals for funding that the Aguda was looking for. Rabbi Sherer took the time, and I actually have them, to send me not one, not two, but 4 personal thank you letters, thanking me for the work that I did in writing these grant proposals for the Aguda.
So my father would daven Nila on Yom Kippur, and I would see Rabbi Sherer on the right side of the shul looking at us, because we were 3 brothers that stood around my father. And Rabbi Sherer would look and he would like motion to us, like with his hands. And after he finished Nila, of course everybody rushed to daven Ma'ariv. And of course they went home to go ahead and break their fast. But when Rabbi Moshe came home, Rabbi Sherer would say to Rabbi Moshe, "No, go ahead, have something." He says, "No, first I have to call my Bal Tfilah." And he would call my father every year after Yom Kippur and give him a Grois and Yashikayach. And he would always say this to him: "Miyatz Hashem Rebaran, you're going to be the Bal Tfilah by the Bayis Shlishi."
Together we will all over the country cry out tonight, Shema Yisroel Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And as a result of this inspiration, Be'ezus Hashem, tens of thousands of new Lemdei Daf Yomi will be created.
I think any public speaker tries to emulate Rabbi Sherer, to speak to the point, brief, and passionately.
I don't have this natural talent that my father had to speak briefly, but he did have that talent, so he spoke only for 6 minutes. 6 minutes! He's speaking of the tens of thousands. 6 minutes, that was it.
Folks, once again, this is for the arena entrance only. Do have your tickets out. This event is scheduled to start in 31 minutes, so please, nice and easy does it.
Rabbi Sherer didn't think big, he thought huge. So I remember when he sent Rabbi Borchardt and Rabbi Besser and myself to take a look at what was then called the Felt Forum. The previous Siyum Shas in 1975 had about 1,200 people. And now you're looking at a venue that had 5,000 people.
Here was a man who looked at a Siyum Shas that had 1,000 people, and then 5,000, and then 18,000.
What are you doing? You're dreaming 75,000 people in 3 stadiums. How are you going to keep them coordinated? But he had a cholam. He's going to make it happen. And he spoke. And then they had the evening. And they davened Ma'ariv. And afterwards I went over to give him a big kiss. And I told him, "Daddy, your speech was so phenomenal." So my father looked at me and said, "You should give me a mazel tov for something else." So I thought he meant for the event itself, that he pulled off something that no one believed he could. He said, "The reason I spoke tonight is because this is the first time, as busy as I am all my life, I concluded Shas with all the Mesaimim, and it's my first Siyum HaShas, so that's why I allowed myself to speak tonight. So give me mazel tov, not for my speech. Don't necessarily give me mazel tov for the Kiddush Hashem of this beautiful event, but give your father a personal mazel tov, because this is the first time he was Mesayim Shas."
He always asked me, what are we doing for the future of Klal Yisroel? What are we doing for Agudas Yisroel? Which is the future of Klal Yisroel?
I remember him always saying to me, we must get younger people into the Aguda.
The fact that the youth, which Mike Tress focused on so heavily, were important because that represented the future of Klal Yisroel.
The first time I met Rabbi Sherer, I was a Talmud of his, actually. I was in Yeshiva Torah V'das, and he came and taught a homiletics course. I didn't even know what the word homiletics meant, but there I discovered that homiletics meant how one delivers a speech. He felt that it was important for Yeshiva Bachra, many of whom would end up hopefully in positions where they were being mashpiyim on others, they would be in a position of rabbanos or in chinuch or wherever it might be, that they have to be able to speak properly and to give over Yiddishkeit properly.
He was the Maggid Shir par excellence. He was the Darshan par excellence. He knew how to give a shir. He knew how to say Dvar Torah.
Shortly after that, I became very much involved in an organization called Tzirei Agudas Yisrael.
He stepped forward and inspired the youth of Klal Yisrael not to close their Gemara. He was a Talmid Chacham. The man knew how to learn. He didn't say close the Gemara. He said use your Gemara and use your Rebbeim and use your Yiddishkeit to take achrayus for Klal Yisroel.
The thing that got him coming to like camp, to love camp, was when his Einikel Levi Langer was bar mitzvahed, and the Langer Mishpacha decided that the bar mitzvah should be in camp. Either he woke up, got woken up, I never get that part of the story straight, very early Shabbos morning, and literally walked the camp from Erev to Erev. I know this because when I got up in the morning to go to Shachris, he met me before Shachris, and he told me how he never had a saga of what camp is like and what camp is. This is his first experience really seeing camp.
Try to do chesed with the next one. Don't live on an island for yourself, and that is my message.
In 1995, when Rabbi Sherer was suffering from his machla at that time, and the doctors did not want him to go out in the public.
My father was very gravely ill, and his doctor, Dr. Coleman, told him that you cannot make this trip. And my father explained to Dr. Coleman, but camps are my life. I look forward every year to going up to the camps and seeing the children.
And I still remember so clearly, when he came when he was deathly ill and no one knew, he called me before and he said, Simcha, I could come, but my hair is falling out. And now it's the 3 weeks. If I come, the boys will think that I shaved in the 3 weeks. So I'm going to come after Tisha B'Av. And he came after Tisha B'Av, against the doctor's wishes. But the doctor said, if you're really going to go, don't you dare hug or touch anyone. And his son Shimshi was watching him. And when he finished saying his words, he rushed to me and hugged me, and I backed off from him. And then when he was leaving, he went to our dear bunk boys and Navid Bays, who were special children that we took in, took care of them. And they went to him, and they stretched out their hands. He shook every boy's hand, and Shimshi said to him, Ta, what are you doing? The doctor said you can't shake hands. He turned to his son and said, do I shake your hand? Yes, but I'm your son. These children are my children. They are my sons too.
If I had to give an overall message of what Moshe Sherer meant in a practical way in the world, which is an interesting question you've asked. A, be honest. B, be humble. And C, stand up for what you believe in and do it. Don't leave it for a third party and say, well, somebody else will take care of it. No, take care of it yourself, and don't forget your family, and don't forget your friends.
With greater zeal than before, Yedaber Pi. Not only will we speak up, but we will do. We will work with all our heart and with all our might and all our soul. Because we know that the end of that road, if we only organize our forces together and make our Koyach HaRabbanim that much stronger, the end of that road is the fulfillment of the Avtoche of the Shavu Bonim Dikvula.